Okay. Okay, let's do this. Hello, everybody. Let's fix that for a second. Hopefully, audio is working, but if someone wants to confirm, that would be great. Welcome back to another GameDev Office Hour. This is number 4, so thanks for joining us. Today's probably going to be a little bit of a shorter one, but before I mention that, I probably want to share the Discord link if you're interested. So we do have a Discord server set up for the office hours, mostly for you to be able to post questions and also to share files if that's something that you want to do. So let me find that invite quickly. Invite, copy. And we'll throw this in here. So if you do want to join the Discord, feel free to do that. I've just dropped the link into the chat. And like I say, if you've got any questions, if you want to share a file that you want us to have a look at, that's the place to do it. So the whole point, remember, of the office hour is for you to ask questions. And if you've got a topic that you want to hear about or something that you're struggling with, then let us know so we can use this time to answer that. Because if you're having a problem with something or you're interested in a certain topic, there's probably a whole bunch of other people who are as well. And what we'd love to be able to do is better serve the community by answering those. So please do feel free to share, and we'll do what we can to get to those. Okay, so like I said, for today, a little bit of a shorter stream. What I thought I would do for today is basically some tips and tricks. This is just stuff that I find helps me with working in Houdini. But then, when we're developing the GameDev tools, we're constantly learning about the software ourselves, things that work, things that don't. And there's just been some stuff that I've kind of collected over the last couple of weeks or months that I thought would be worth sharing if you're making your own tools or you're just interested in kind of how the tools work under the hood. So that's what I'm going to be doing today. At any point, jump in and ask questions. Louise and Paul are around. They're monitoring the chat, so they can also help out. And I think we might have a look at some Gaia stuff later today. We'll see if that's how the timing works out. Otherwise, we can save that for the next one. Okay, so let's jump across here, and I'm just going to bring up my notes, and we can start talking about some of the stuff. So good there, good there. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to show, which has absolutely nothing to do with GameDev tools necessarily, but I find that I use it so often, and it's pretty much in all the recordings I've done of using Houdini, is some shortcuts that I've set up for my contexts. So I don't know about you, but I find myself jumping between the object context, the art context, and the material context pretty often. And so I've actually got that set up to shortcut keys. So if I I'm on a Mac, but if I hit Control-1, it'll actually take me to the geometry or the object context. Control-2 will take me to the art context where I can put down my ROPs. And then lastly, I've got 3 to matte and 4 to my cops. And this is just a quick way for me to jump around. Now, you might already know about the quick starts, but that's not what I'm talking about. This is specifically mapping shortcuts to this option over here. And so the thing I wanted to show you is, let's just hide those notifications so we don't get bothered by those. There we go. The thing that I want to show you was how do you actually very quickly set up shortcut keys for things like that. And then that way you can also do the same thing. So over here, you'll see that there is a Go menu option with all of these, and these are already mapped. But the way you do that is you mash a whole bunch of keys on your keyboard, because you have to push Control, Alt, and Shift and then click on the option that you want. And what that actually does is it brings up the hotkey manager. So you can also open this from your menu. So I think it's edit hotkeys. But this is just kind of a quicker way to get to it. And now that it's open, what I could do, for instance, let's say that I went to my chop context, I can double click and then choose, say, Control 5, and it'll add that as a hotkey. So just to repeat that again, if you go to click on one of these things, and then on a Windows machine it'd be Control, Shift, and Alt, and on a Mac it would be Control, Shift, and Option. Then if you hold all three of those down and click on a menu option, it brings up the hotkey manager. So something that I find really helpful. I guess that goes back to days when I would have to map render flags and display flags to 1 and 2, but since we now use R and T for that, that pretty much takes care of it. But I do like these. It allows me to very quickly kind of jump between my different contexts without having to use the mouse to get to it. So just a little note, thought I would share that with you. So the other thing I want to show today is something that's come up over and over and over again because it affects a lot of our tools, and it's something that I wasn't too sure how to solve until recently, and it had to do with the mosaic node. So if I go to the rock context, we have a bunch of nodes which use the mosaic nodes because we want to be able to create texture sheets to get them into your game engine. So one of those would be the texture sheets node, which is this guy over here. And I think, what else have we got that uses it? Going blank for a second. The motion vectors one uses it, and I think we might have it being used somewhere else. But the problem sometimes that we're faced with the mosaic node, let me kind of just show you that on its own. So let me find a file that I can use to show this. Something that I used recently. Let's see, what do we got here? I'm sure I did something with fire at some point, and that'll be a good example. But otherwise, I'll just use some random stuff. Projects. To do fire. Let's see. So I think this is one of my working files for trying to figure out the fire presets, but it should give me an animation and hopefully an image sequence so I can kind of show you the problem I'm running into. And if that doesn't work, I can always just load up a image sequence. Okay, I think that's broken, so let's just go straight here. So I'm actually in my COP network at the moment, and what I'm going to do is just bring in an image sequence. So let's do that. Close that for a second, and let's find something we can use. GameDev shelf, hip, renders. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of stuff here we can use. Let's see. Fireball, explosion. Yeah, let's do that. Composite view. It's clearly trying to run that sim, so I should probably get out of this. Let me turn these off so we don't have to worry about that. Kill. There we go. Let's go back there. And let's see if we can get this to reload. Okay, so that'll give me a bunch of images, which is good. So if you've ever used the texture sheets or the motion vectors ROP, you'll know that we take an image sequence and then we convert it into the texture sheet. And to do that under the hood, we're using the mosaic node. And you've probably seen this before. I know we've mentioned it in a couple of webinars in the past. But essentially what it allows you to do is take that sequence of images and then create something that looks like this. which is great because then you can send that off as a sub-UV texture in Unreal or as a texture sprite sheet in Unity or whatever else, and it'll do what it needs to do. The problem is when you start dealing with frame ranges that don't start from 1, and also if your current time is not set to 1. So I'll show you what I mean. If I actually step forward a frame to 2, you notice what the mosaic node does. It actually is currently set to give me 16 frames, and I know that because it's max 16 and images per line. But if I go to frame 2, it will actually give me the next 16 frames, which is useful if you were trying to break this up into multiple pieces. But the problem is when you're trying to specifically grab this range, regardless of where you are in your time. And we've had a number of people run into this problem when they're using the tool. So the way to solve that is actually by using the extend node. And what this does is it kind of sets boundaries, and then regardless of what your current time is at the bottom here, it'll always use the same range. And it's a little counterintuitive because it's something that happens after the mosaic, as far as I know. But basically what I can do is I plug that in, and then I change pre-extend to hold and post-extend to hold, I think. No, it's not going to work because I think I actually need to set this to how many frames I want. Override frame range, we'll do 16. Okay, there we go. So basically what I've done is I've said just give me the first 16 frames, then the extend knows that that's all I'm dealing with, and it holds everything after and it holds everything before. And so that now lets me kind of move through my time range, and it doesn't change. So if I did want to, for instance, skip these, say, first 8 frames because, there's not much happening in the explosion, then I could say shift to start frame 8. I think I need to, I always get these two confused. There we go. So I've said start from the 8th frame. And now what it does is it gives me those onwards. So it's a little thing. If you're doing any custom texture sheet stuff of your own, this is how you would solve that problem, which I know a lot of people are run into. So hopefully that kind of helps you out. And just to show you that that's what we're doing, let me drop down the texture sheets node. Texture sheets. And I'm actually going to open this up and dive inside so you can see that. And you'll notice that wherever I have a mosaic node, which is probably down here, directly after every mosaic is now an extend. And that was something that I added, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago after actually speaking to one of our developers about how to handle that situation. So hopefully that helps. Okay, by the way, I'm going to probably be covering a bunch of random stuff to do with cops today, just because that was the list that I came up with. I know that for GameDev, we seem to be using cops more and more, and it's great because we've got the compositing network right there, but it can also be not so great when you start running into some of the idiosyncrasies of what that does. So I'll come back to that, to cops in a little bit. But the other thing I want to show you was hidden palms, because this is something that I've kind of gotten into the habit of doing, and it gets around some of the issues you might have with creating your HDAs. So you might already know this, but once you have created an HDA, anything inside of the HDA is basically locked from being editable. You can't make changes to things inside. The only way to make changes to something is to expose the parameter to the HDA, and then that's how you feed information down into it. Which is great when you're kind of working with simplified HDAs, but it starts to become a problem if you have nested HDAs. Or if there's values that you want to change based on a script, but not based on a user input. So let's have a look at an example of this. So the example that comes to mind, because it was a pretty big thing that we did recently, was the Baker nodes. So before I do that, I'm going to show the imposter node, because this is probably an example of how not to do things. But until we find a better solution to get around this, I just want to kind of show you what the issue is. So with the imposter ROP, if you're doing an animation, we needed a way to render out multiple angles of an object for multiple frames. And then once we did that, we had to composite it all together. But you don't know up front how many frames you're going to need or how many angles you're going to have. So in order to create a compositing network that can handle all of that, becomes a little tricky, because there's no easy way to kind of see that. So the way that we got around that is actually by using an editable node. So if I unlock this and I go to my type properties, you'll see that under node, there's a couple of nodes which have been made editable. Now, if you haven't seen this before, basically what that means is, even though I have nodes inside my HDA, they are unlocked. They're actually stuff that I can change. And so if we have a look at the difference between a locked node and an unlocked node, you'll see what I'm talking about. So have a look. If I double click on this and I dive inside, notice how this node over here is not grayed out like the others. And that's because it is editable. And this is really useful when maybe there's something about an HDA that you want your user to add information to. A good example of that would be for, let's say that you have a cloud generator and you have a standard noise that you're running on that cloud, but you want to be able to give the user the option to add their own custom noise. What you could do is you could make a node editable so that the user could add their own noise inside of that and then use that as an output to the cloud. So that's just a quick idea of an example. In this case, this is actually empty. So you'll notice here that this animation cop doesn't have anything inside of it. And the reason for that is because when we actually render with the imposter node, there's a script that runs that will grab all of the frames that were rendered out, and it will create a compositing network based on that context. The problem with that, though, is if the script doesn't complete or something fails, you're left with all these nodes in there. And the other problem is, if I make any changes inside of here, so this is the problem we had with the old Baker, those changes are not saved. So because it's an editable node, we're basically saying that anything inside should be left alone as part of the state of the HDA. So it causes a lot of problems. If you are going to use editable nodes, I would suggest you be very clear as to why you want to use them. But this is something we ran into with the Bakers. So the way that we now deal with it, and the reason I want to kind of show hidden palms, is how do you pass information down from one HDA to an HDA that might be nested inside of it in a way that allows you to kind of control that stuff, but also not show it to the general user. And so if I unlock this guy and I open it up, you'll notice over here, I've actually already unlocked it. I have this folder, which is called private palms folder. And by default, this is actually hidden. So what you would see as a general user is something like this, where there essentially isn't anything there. Sweet. This allows me to do a couple of things. So if I make that, no, don't want to make that invisible. Show invisible, private palms folder. I'm going to turn that off. So this is essentially while I'm working on the tool. But it allows me to store information on the node that I can use as kind of, you can think of them as variables. Imagine you want to store local variables for values that you want to be able to change either by a script, or maybe there are multiple ways that a value could be set. Then that's essentially what these guys do. So everything you see here is being driven by something else or is being passed onto something else, but I don't need the user to see it. So what that allows me to do then is, if we're going to have a look at, let's go and have a look over here. I'm actually going to just start with a new file because I've got my simulation trying to run in the background the whole time, which is probably not what I want. So I'll do that. And let's drop down one of the bakers. Let's do the simple baker. So the simple baker has inside of it a ROPNet, and the ROPNet has the games baker. And just to confuse the hell out of you, the games baker has the baked texture node. So there's a lot of kind of nesting going on here, and this is kind of what we need in order to wrap this up to make it as simple as possible for you to use. But if you are developing your own tools, then this is something that's worth noting. So remember that I showed you those hidden parameters. As soon as I've now put this inside of another HDA, what that allows me to do is I can use that to then pass information down the chain. Let's just show this quickly. Sorry, bring this to where you can see it. So I've just turned on show invisible, and okay, that's not invisible, that's good. So somewhere down here, there we go. So these are all these invisible parameters which are being used to drive things inside of the HDA, but these themselves are being driven a level up by the simple baker. And so we're able to do this nesting and pass information down without having to make the nodes editable, because the alternative, and the way that we used to do this, was that if you were to set values, say over here, the only way to then pass those to this guy was to make it editable, and then we could actually change these with scripts or something else. The problem with that is, if we made any changes as the game dev team, if we fixed a bug or something else, if we forgot to make the node not editable, and then save the changes and then make it editable, we would see the changes on our machines, but you wouldn't see them on yours. And so it created a lot of problems. And so that's why we've kind of gone about treating it this way. So something to keep note of is have a look for hidden parameters or use them yourself. Another great example is, I want to say the Pyro preview node. I feel like I haven't done the greatest at describing this, but no, texture sheets. No, it's on one of these. Yeah, I think it's the texture sheets. So on the texture sheets, I've actually done some interesting stuff, which is you can plug in a camera into your texture sheets, sorry, a mantra ROP. And what that will do, notice over here, if we select this guy and I kind of scroll down, you'll see that we've got a bunch of settings here. Have a look at this, these details here. As soon as I plug this in, it actually changes. And the reason for that is the way that I've set up this node is I've basically said, if there is a mantra node as an input to the texture sheets, use all of the settings on this mantra node instead of all the settings over here. So I needed a way that I could store both the settings for the texture sheets ROP and for the mantra incoming ROP, and then send those on to the nodes that are inside. And so once again, the way that I do that is using invisible parameters. So if I turn that on, and then I scroll down, I'll give you some examples of that. We'll turn that on, turn that on, we'll turn that on. And so actually what's happening under the hood, essentially, if we have a look at this guy, is there are multiple inputs. And depending on what you've done, whether you've plugged something in or whether you don't have a mantra node plugged in, decides what gets shown to you, and then it passes that information. So you'll see that I've got like a mantra external, mantra internal, and then what the user sees, which is mantra, this one over here. And so that's how you're able to kind of combine things together without having all of these extra parameters made visible to the user, but you can still kind of control these more complex logic systems for the HDAs. So I think I might have had some questions come in about this, and I just ran through a whole bunch of stuff. So let's stop there and see what we got. I think I saw one about... So there was a question about, I use editable nodes on curves for UE4. Have you already answered that, Louise, before I start jumping in there? Okay, cool. So you're just talking about the Mapbox stuff. I use editable nodes on curves for UE4 viewport controls. Are there any nodes that you expressly shouldn't turn editable? So my advice to you is you should almost never make a node editable. The example I gave before is the only time you should make a node editable is if you want to pass on control to the user to actually dive inside from a Houdini perspective. I think it becomes even more dangerous if you start using it in some of the Houdini engine contexts, because let's say that you're working with someone who doesn't have access to Houdini, then if something goes wrong, or if there's logic that's being changed inside the editable node, there's nothing the user can do about it, because it requires opening up Houdini and going through there. So if you can avoid it, I would say almost always avoid it. It's just for those special cases where, for instance, you might have something like, let's see if I can set this up. So one example is, like I was saying earlier about the, let's do this quickly, material. Okay, so let's do this. I'm gonna set up a volume quickly. We'll do that there. Let that guy go. And then turn that into a volume. And we'll just increase the resolution. So, you know, what I might do here is, let's say that I want to use a volume VOP. And inside the volume VOP, I want to use some turbulent noise to kind of break up the shapes here. So let's plug that in there, and let's just multiply the density. There, there. Okay. Of course, that's going to break because I might need to fit this. So I don't know if this is already density. Let's see. I think I just got to get the frequency right. And let's just change this so we don't kind of eat into it too much. Okay, so what I want to show you here is, let's say that this is all wrapped up in an HDA. And so I will do that. So I'll go there, and I'll do create digital assets, and this will be my test asset, and accept. There we go. Now, what I can do actually here is, and the reason I chose this as an example, with the volume VOP, you can actually choose your vex source. So if I was to change this from myself to shop, what I can actually do is point to a CVEX. No, that's the wrong one. Hopefully this works with MatNets as well as ShopNets, otherwise this is going to fail. But what I want to do is, I think it's CVEX Shader Builder, is I can actually point to this guy over here. Okay, so that seems to be working. So you can actually, in a CVEX builder, pretty much do the same thing that you're doing inside of here. I can create this logic and then do it. But now, the reason I've set it up this way is I actually want the user to be able to make changes to this. This is not for me. This is just if the user wants to override. So the thing that I would expose here is a switch to say, and I'm keeping this super simple, but let's put a toggle here, and the toggle is going to basically choose this option over here. So we'll just hit apply there, and we'll grab this guy, copy parameter, paste relative references, and then if this is working the way I want it to, it should switch between myself and shop. Yeah, so that's fine. Then what I want to do is I want to be able to dive inside of this guy. So there's two things I'm going to do. The one is I'm going to copy this path, and I'm going to go to node, and I'm going to set my dive target to this. And you'll see in a second what that does. So I think I need to get rid of that and hit accept. Let's see if this works for us. If I save the node, match current definition, when I double click on this, you'll notice that it actually takes me into the CVEX builder directly. So that's the one part of it. The other part of it is I want to make that editable. So if I go to type properties and I go here, I want to go basically take that same location and drop that inside there. Unlock and save node type, and then match current definition. So what this is now allowing me to do is, by default, I can use the noise that I had made myself. But if I want the user to have the ability to add their own noise, they can turn this on, and then when they double click on this, it dives inside. And if we have a look, this is editable. So what that means is the user is able to put down nodes, build out their own custom network, and then that's the thing that, say, drives the noise of the volume. So that's an example of where I would say you want to use editable nodes, when you're trying to override certain functionality that the user is going to take control of, not something that you want to do. Hopefully that describes and explains what I was trying to say. Any other questions around that stuff before I kind of move on from that? Let's see what we got here. Okay. Hey, Magnus. Any plans to improve? I would say, so yeah, look, we know that COPS is a little long in the tooth, and I'm going to get to another tip in a second which kind of proves that point, which I think I have a bug that I need to fix for you anyway. We are looking to improve COPS. I think I want to be clear that there are some great compositing packages out there, and I don't think we're in a position where we want to necessarily directly compete in the same space, but I think we do want to make COPS a lot more friendly for the kind of things that would be good for Houdini. So an example of that is Luis showed the Substance plugin 2 weeks ago, and if you are interested in that, check out the YouTube channel. There's a video on how that works. But a great example of using COPS in conjunction with Substance within Houdini makes a lot of sense. There are cases where you need to deal with height fields, and you might want to bring that stuff into COPS. So I think there's improvement. So to answer your question directly regarding improvements specifically for film, I'm going to say probably not. We're probably still going to stick to giving you the ability to do basic slap comps and a couple of other things. But at the end of the day, like I say, there are other compositing packages that are much more fully featured and dedicated to being a good compositing experience. And I don't think that's the space that we're necessarily going to be moving in. Yeah, but stay tuned. We might have more on COPS next year sometime. We'll see. Okay, there's a bunch of stuff, and I'm not too sure what I should be focusing on. Are there any other unanswered question, guys, that I should be looking at, or are you kind of dealing with them in chat as we go? Paul? Okay. I know we were having problems with audio from multiple people earlier, so the only one we need to take offline is the Mapbox question, but otherwise it looks like everything else has been dealt with. Okay. So in that case, I will move on. So that took more time than expected, but I did answer two things at once. Hidden palms is the way to go if you want to pass information around and also do some more sort of complex setups. Have a look at the texture sheets node and the Baker nodes if you want examples for how we use them. Just in your type properties, let's dive inside there, type properties. If there are invisible parameters, then what you need to do is turn this on and then they will show up. And then each parameter has the ability to make it invisible or not invisible. So, yeah. Okay. So, going back to COPS land for a bit, this is less about, well, yeah, it is about COPS, so let's talk about it. You might not know this, but there's actually a hard limit on the max canvas size in COPS. And you can change that in your preferences. So if you go to edit preferences and then compositing, I think it's here. Let's see if I can find it. Has it moved? Or am I looking in the wrong place? Miscellaneous. No, that's not it. I'm just going to randomly click on stuff until I find it. But there is a 10,000 pixel limit on COPS. Unless we remove that. Am I blind here? Could have sworn it was here. Oh, I blasted right past it. Thanks, Louise. Yeah, so the reason I'm pointing this out is because every now and again, you might want to, for whatever reason, create a 16K texture, or you're trying to create a texture sheet, which is maybe each frame is 1K and that gives you 16,000 or more pixels. This is what you need to change. So unfortunately, it'll just throw up an error saying that it's not possible. But this is what you want to come and have a look at. Is change this and then you can increase it. I mean, the reason we put that in place was probably at the time we were trying to manage your memory usage and we didn't want you to break your machines. But I think these days you can probably handle the amount of pixel data that you want to pass through. So have a look at that and that will fix that for you. Okay, so staying in COPS, and I wonder if I can use the new vertex animation texture sheet to show this. I'm just going to dive inside here. So let's see if I've done any of that stuff here. Got that over there. No, I guess not, because let's see if I can find it. So the thing I want to point out, we have people ask us every now and again if there is a wrangle in COPS, and there isn't. And I think the reason is because, well, actually, I was going to say it had to do with multi-threading, but it might not. COPS in general is not threaded, so there are some operations that are quite slow. But if I'm currently in a COPS network and I try to put down a wrangle, you'll see that it doesn't even come up. But you can actually create something very similar. So if you put down a VOPCOP filter or a generator, depending on what you're trying to do, what you can do is inside the VOPCOP is put down a snippet node. So this is essentially the same thing as a wrangle. You've just got to do a little bit of the tying together yourself. So now you can start adding inputs to this, and those will become available to you in here. And now you can pretty much use your VEX as you normally would in a wrangle. There's a couple of minor changes to how the attributes are brought in and what's exported back out. But for the most part, that should be able to give you what you need. And in fact, this is what a wrangle is. If I go back into the geometry context and I drop down a wrangle, you might have seen this before because you double-clicked on it by mistake. But the wrangle exposes this vex expression. But if I dive inside, it's actually a VOPNet with a snippet inside. So it's exactly the same sort of functionality, the same setup. There just isn't one in COPS, but if you do want to do stuff in COPS, similarly with those kind of nodes, it would help if I would go to the right place. Then all you need to do is drop down a VOPCOP filter or generator, and then inside that you can drop down a snippet, and then it'll kind of give you what you need. I was hoping to show you an example of that. I know that I used it in the vertex animation textures, but I might have removed them recently. So let's see if I can find one. No, this is not what I'm looking for. Thank you. Okay, Maps Baker also has it. Maps Baker. Maps Baker, Cops Baking. Somewhere in here? Is this? There we go. Yeah. So yeah, thanks, Paul. This is an example of it. So we actually use it for position where we can dive inside here. There is a snippet node, and that's setting the height field position with a couple of inputs and then a couple of outputs. And just to show you the slight differences in the syntax, notice that there's actually a dollar HPOS, and that's the thing that gets exported, as opposed to your typical @ symbols that you might be dealing with. And you'll see here as well, we've got these dollar signs for that. So useful to know if that's something that you want to use. And since we're looking at the Maps Baker, the last thing that I wanted to talk about today has to do with actually using height fields and wrangles instead of COPS, because they're kind of the same thing. So I'm going to open up a file here. Projects, GameDev shelf. Let's bring that up. So recently I made some changes to the volume texture op, partly for speed reasons and partly for some other reasons, but I wanted to kind of show you what's going on here. So I'll let that do its thing. Am I in here? Yeah, so this is a mess. But you'll see in a second what's going on. So previously, the volume texture op, basically what it did was it would take a slice of the volume and write that to an image, and then it would take the next slice and write that to an image, and so on and so forth, and they would compile them into a texture sheet. The problem with that is that, like I mentioned earlier, COPS is single-threaded in a lot of ways, and it was getting quite slow, especially for larger resolutions where maybe you wanted to kind of get more fidelity. So the way that it now works is actually by using height fields, because height fields essentially you can think of like images, because they're 2D volumes, so it's a voxel per pixel. But they're threaded, which means you're going to get much better response time when you do changes. The downside, however, is it can be quite difficult to visualize the result from a height field. So it's kind of balancing the two in order to see what's working. But I thought I would show this to you anyway, because maybe there's something that you want to do either with height fields or with COPS, and this is one of the ways you could handle it. So let's say that I have this volume, and by the way, this volume is actually animated. So I'm just going to go through a couple of frames, and that looks like a mess. So let me just show you what this is actually. So this is just a very quick explosion test that I was doing. I care less about the quality of the explosion and more just about multiple frames, which we'll get to in a second. But I'm just using the heat field in this case, so I can have a look at it. But basically what I do is I do a whole bunch of prep for the volume, which you're not going to see over here, which is fine. But then what I'm doing is, instead of taking this information into COPS, which is what we did before, and in fact I've actually got both networks here. So you can bring a volume into COPS, and it'll set that as an image plane. But then what we did is we actually had a bunch of VEX code, VOP network that kind of looked like this. And what that would do is it would, like I said, take each of those slices, kind of put them together, and then a mosaic node to kind of create this texture sheet. I have a feeling this might not work because it's expecting old nodes, and those nodes no longer exist. So let's see if I go here. Stop doing whatever it's doing. Come on. It's one of these loops that it's not going to get out of until it's finished. Okay, so I'll let it run. You can see already that this is quite slow. This is trying to process each slice, and then once it's processed all the slices, which is it's actually doing them almost as if they were frames, it's then going to use the mosaic node to put them together. So we'll just let that finish running, and hopefully I can jump back into it. You can't even see it, so let me move this up, and now you can see there's the changes happening very slowly, frame by frame. And I have a feeling when this finishes we won't even be able to see the results, so I apologize for that. Okay, let's see if we get what do we want. Or if this is going to try and go where I think it's going, I might have to kill this and open it again. There we go. Okay, let's go back here. Okay, here we go. So we are getting information coming through. It's just not quite what we want, which is fine. So that was the old way. What I actually really want to show you is the new way of dealing with this. So what I'm actually doing now is I create two height fields, and I set the size of them based on the resolution of my final image. So I think in this case we're not going to see anything. Let's see. Okay, so you can see here we've got our height field. Currently there is no information in it, and we can turn that on, but that's just going to visualize that. And then what I'm actually doing is I'm using a volume wrangle with all of the same logic that I had inside of the COP VOP network to basically pull data from my volume, which is this one over here. There we go. See that there, and then I shove that into the height field. Sorry, my brain just decided to do a reboot there for a second. Okay, so the cool thing with this is, first of all, I'm not having to do each frame individually. I've actually already divided up my final resolution using a little bit of logic up here. Oh, no, it's struggling a little bit there. So this is the logic that gives me a slice and then kind of puts it all together. And then once I've got that, I can then actually pass that into COPS. So this is currently a height field. If we middle click here, you'll see that there's a height field and a mask field. And then if I come inside my COP network, we've got our SOP import, and the SOP import will bring in that data. I think I might need to copy channels across. There we go. And then we'll equalize that to kind of get what we need. Let's get rid of that. So I'm still bringing it into COPS because I still want to export an image, but the difference is I'm doing all of my processing in SOPs through a height field or a volume wrangle, and then I'm passing that information across. And the advantage to something like this is definitely one of them being speed, because if we come back here and I go back to this over here, I can now, for 1,000 by 1,000 pixel texture, see each of those frames and the slices for an entire animation, which is something we couldn't really do before because the processing time just took really long and it was a bit of a pain to set up. So if you are looking for speed for dealing with pixel information, have a look at height fields. The Maps Baker does it. We do it in the volume texture op, but it's definitely another way to handle it. And I think this is something that we want to improve on as for functionality, but also to the question about cops earlier. Some of the stuff I think should live in cops, and that's what we would love to see. I just can't make any promises about when or if that's going to happen. Yeah. So I said it was going to be a short stream. I lied because this took more time than I thought it would. But those are just some of the tips and tricks that I wanted to show you today. Are there any questions that I've missed that I should cover? Okay, it looks like... Am I missing anything, Paula Louise? Nope. Yeah, it's a good idea, Mo. So yeah, we'll have a look at monthly challenges. I think for now we're focused on some other stuff, but after the stream, Louise, Paul, and I will chat and see if that's something we can do. If you are looking for VFX game dev stuff, I would highly recommend realtimevfx.com. They have a monthly challenge. They're great. They focus more on the final product, which often involves the game engine as well as the DCC packages. But you know, maybe there is something we could do on our side regarding procedural monthly challenges. We'll have a look at it and see what we can do. Yeah. So yeah, something we can look into. Just Louise, 1 second. I'm just going to switch over because I don't think the audio is coming through on the last one. Do you want to say that again?
Yeah. I just wanted to say that the plugin that we showed on the last stream, the Substance plugin, is now in kind of semi-closed open beta. I just want to run it through a couple of people before, just so it runs in more than one machine. So far, so good. So I'm expecting it to become part of the GameDev packages, hopefully in the next week or so. But if you kind of have an urgent need or you're really excited about it, do let me know, Louise at Side Effects, LUIZ, and I'll get you the link for it.
Okay, thank you for joining us. If you want to, please feel free to send out this link to other people so they can watch the recording. It's all part of our channel. And once again, the best thing that you can do is ask questions, send in ideas for topics. You can either do that in the Discord, which there's an invite link in the chat, or you can send them to us directly. Louise has just given his email address for the Substance plugin, but you can find all of us on Twitter and send it there as well. We're looking to help as best we can. So thanks again for your time, and have a great morning, day, or evening, depending on where you are. Bye.